My name is Amy Vetter, and I am the IMTA Executive Committee Innovations Task Force leader. And I'm here with Jonathan today from CVH. And why was Cherry Becker particularly interested in AI? What were you trying to solve and look at with, what kind of key areas of the technology were you looking for to solve those problems?
That's a great question. So there's this balance between trying to solve a specific problem, and AI fits in really well, or at least in theory, with a lot of those problems. And then we have this really neat technique that I don't know what problem it's going to solve, but I really know that it's not just interesting, it's got some real legs about it. And so we kind of took both of those approaches. A few years ago, our firm set up an innovation advisory council, which was made up of a lot of external thought leaders that really had no background necessarily in accounting. They were maybe friends of the firm or influencers in our various communities. And one in particular, who actually spoke at our audit conference that you spoke at the year before you. And he's a big name in artificial intelligence and had done a lot of very, very neat things over the years. And he helped us develop a really cool product at the time that we're not using anymore. But it was more of just him educating us on how to innovate, the mindset to have. And I think we kind of some of our initiatives predated where the market is today. But all that to say, we didn't really have a strategy going in. We just got swept up in the education, and we're like, this is really cool. And while it's still really cool, I think we're much more deliberate in our approach than maybe we were at the beginning.
So what is the approach now?
So with AI in particular, actually, no, with auditing and technology in particular, the way that I tend to view it is if it's getting us closer to a continuous audit, I'm gonna be very patient with the technology. I'm gonna really try to see a few years down the road what's just hype and what is real. If it's not really designed to get us towards a continuous audit, the ROI has to be there like immediately, and it has to be substantial. And there are a lot of products that do both those things, but at least for me in the audit world, our end goal of this, of course, is standardization and anomaly detection and doing all the cool stuff and bringing a different type of value to our clients. But to me, that's going to really be towards much more real-time information. I know there's a lot of talk about getting on the other side of predicting what's going to happen, and I'm not quite there yet in terms of where I think it's all going to go. I think that sounds really fun, and that would be a great place for CPAs to go. But for now, I think if we can even just say, hey, someone just posted or is attempting to post an entry and that's getting kicked up, and we're in the background designing those processes of how to define an anomaly in real time, that's where I really see the value of our profession. We know how to do that. We're better than a lot of other folks to be able to be poised to do that. And then maybe eventually we can predict the future. But for now, if it's closer to continuous, I'm pretty excited about it. If not, it's got to be a really compelling use case.
Great. So why don't you give me an example of a process you were trying to innovate, and what was your selection process with the technology? So before actually implementing it, you identifying the problem and then going about selecting technology. How did you do it?
There's so many good ones. So we have, like I said at the beginning, a new innovation advisory group that is internal now. So we've gone away from the external piece. We still meet with them, but not as regularly. And I think we're getting pretty good at the mindset internally. And so we now vet a bunch of ideas from all various service lines. We'll educate ourselves on a topic, and I know we're primarily talking about artificial intelligence or initiatives there, but RPA is a big one right now for us too. Even at the mid-sized firm level,
we can talk about that as well. So
okay, great. Well, that one actually, and I think I may have mentioned this in one of our AIOM meetings. We have this innovation advisory council that will pitch an idea or a technique. So we've done one with artificial intelligence for its specific uses in accounting. And then most recently, though, we had gone down some RPA efforts, just me and one other guy in IT trying to really push forward a really neat initiative, I thought, on the audit side. Well, we ended up saying, hey, let's get everyone's take on this. We've got a certain bucket of dollars that we want to spend towards RPA initiatives for the next fiscal year.
Maybe we just pause for a moment and define RPA for everyone in case.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll go home and I'll tell my wife about all this. Because in my bubble, I don't think it's a bubble, right?
Exactly.
I think, of course, everyone knows all this stuff.
I'll speak up to the people that won't raise their hand and say, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes, thank you. So RPA is just really any business process automation. It doesn't have to be RPA, which is robotic process automation, but just automating general business processes. That's been one that we really went probably 3 years ago heavy into artificial intelligence because that's where all the hype was.
Right.
And it still is. But you really can't get to AI until you, number one, have your processes down pat. Absolutely. And you know where the data is going to come from and you know what it's going to look like. And so we realized after trying to use some of these AI techniques, our data is not at all standard. We don't really know what we're looking for. And it would be really neat, but it's not a magic box of really, great revenue producing things. So it's a great theory right now, but it still needs a lot of human interaction.
Yeah.
And so we kind of backed up, and in this past January, actually, we had gone down the road of automating one of our processes on the audit side and got about halfway through, and we're still moving forward with it. But we did a really neat thing, and a lot of big companies do this, where it's just an ideation workshop. So we got our Innovation Advisory Council together.
So what process was this?
The one that I'll tell you in a second, because we kind of put the brakes on and then kind of went a different route. So we got our groups together. I was pitching them, here's what robotic process automation is. Here are the different things that I think it could be used in. And that was 2 or 3 hour session. And then for the next 2 or 3 hours, I dismissed them by service line to brainstorm their own applications. Because as an auditor, I don't know tax and I don't know advisory and I don't know a lot of what our firm is really good at. And they came back, and then for about an hour and a half, we pitched, not Shark Tank style, like I wasn't making deals, but we wanted to hear from their end, where do you think this could be applied? And there was one in tax. Actually, there were about 30 in tax, but we chose one in tax that just the room, the tenor just changed completely. And it's really neat when you see a technique that someone gets it and then everyone understands, how have we not been doing that? And so for us, that one that we're almost done with and trying to launch, well, I don't think it's going to get there exactly because of the tax deadline for a corporate, but it's for just extensions for our pass-through entities. Okay. And so currently we do thousands and thousands of those. And it's a human. It's usually an intern or someone low level that doesn't need to be an expert, but it takes them a handful of minutes for every single return. And then you got to educate them, and then you got to do exception reporting. And so we're almost done automating that. And in fact, I was supposed to be on a call right now, but decided I'd rather talk to you.
Well, thank you.
In any case, that one we're really excited about. And so that was just an easy one to say, all right, that's what we're going to do. But then when it gets down to the states and doing other things with people that do have tax due instead of a pass-through entity, that's where we say, once we get this process really, really pat, then we can start to introduce some of the artificial intelligence to make some decisions for us, as opposed to right now, you don't really need a human to do any of that. And so
let me back you up just before you get too far. So you identified the problem with the extensions. So how did you go and start assessing technology?
So one of the really good things that we did with RPA in particular is, obviously we've been trying to get into it for a long, long time. So we wrote up in our little innovation group exact rules of processes that would be good candidates for robotic process automation. We do the same thing with just about any pilot. But for this one in particular, we have very stated ways to grade a process as a candidate. From there, everybody would rank them, and then to choose the technology behind it. In RPA, I mean, specifically to that, there are consultants that can help you build your first few bots. You can contract with some of the vendors themselves. What we tend to do is read a lot of the Gartner and Forrester reports to do a lot of that due diligence for us and figure out, all right, which of these vendors really match up to what we're trying to do. We're certainly not married to one tech for that. And so we kind of blend across several in that regard. We ended up for our first few bots, because I had alluded to some AI mistakes that we made in the past. And one of those was just, do you build it or do you buy it? And I think we had made not necessarily a misstep. We had learned a lot by trying to build our first from the ground up. And being a mid-sized firm, that's just a lot more effort than I think we understood at the time. And so for these first few forays into automation, we've chosen a few consultants to help us build that, and then get really, really good, understand how to build those processes and really spell out exactly how to do those things, and then educate our folks internally and bring that in-house. So we do have a few licenses here and there, but for the most part, we're learning from the experts and then figuring out how to bring it inside.
So then how does it actually get implemented into the process? So just taking that small process. So you test it, you get the right vendors to help with the education if you decide to build or buy. And then how do you actually get it as part of the everyday operating procedure?
So that's a good question. And I wish there are so many models of change management out there. Here's the way I approach it, because we are always running pilots, and I don't think we're unique in that. I think most firms are doing a lot of things, and sifting through the hype is, to me, the beginning of all change management. And there's so much chatter in our profession, and I'm sure others too, about if you don't adopt this technology, you're going to be left behind, or if you do adopt this technology, you're going to be billionaires. And none of it's true. I mean, it's just, there's so many distracting ways to talk about tech. But so for us, what we really do is we beat up which technology we're going to focus on before we actually run a pilot. Once we run a pilot, there are parameters I'll put on it before we launch that in a small scale. Typically what I'll do is I'll get very passionate people that are very open-minded and have a little bit of authority on them, or at least get one person with authority in the pilot as well. Right. We'll test it, and I try to get them to, I never will say, do you like it? Because
you don't know until you've actually used it a few times.
Well, even if they're using it, like during the pilot, when I do my check-in calls with them, I'm not going to say, all right, guys, do you like this product? Right. Because as I don't know if it's accounting or just humans don't like it.
Go to the negative. Yeah.
The answer is going to be no, we don't like it because it didn't look like what we're currently
what we were doing before. Yeah.
So we gotta.
Such good advice. I just want to I listen to Oprah Winfrey's podcast all the time, and she's like, "That's a tweetable moment." Tweet. So I think that one is a tweetable moment.
Okay, great. Yeah. Do not ask them if they like it.
Don't ask if they like it.
Do not. So what I try to do is before we even launch the pilot, here's the problem. I mean, you had asked earlier, what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And most of our pilots now, we've gotten to the point where we are going to try and solve a problem. And some of the really innovative stuff, it's a solution looking for a problem. And I think that's actually a good thing. I like that sandbox, but we're really selective if we're going to pilot those things. So having a very clear explanation of what that problem is, using numbers for the most part, at least I've found a lot of success. Do you know that we spend X amount of time waiting for, certain things to download? Or do you know that the average intern is going to spend 10 minutes on filing this extension? And we do 11,000 of these extensions. And then you do the math, that gets and it gets easy to sell the problem. And then I check in probably about once every week or two, depending on the dating of it. And then once I know how things are going, before I even make a decision, I'm knowing when I'm going to make that call, and I know what it's going to look like throughout the process if it's failing. And I think a lot of times we get really excited, or when I hear keynotes at various conferences or listen to experts, it's all about how good it's going to be, or if you don't, like, it's going to be awful. But I don't think we really define, here's how to run a pilot. Yeah. Here's what failure is going to look like. And knowing when to pull the plug. And so we pulled the plug on a number of pilots. But if I do decide to answer your original question, how do I get it going forward? I start with the really happy people, the passionate, the innovative folks, the ones that can kind of see past the current problems. And then I'll usually start with a question of, all right, in a year from now, once we get the bugs out, is this technology getting us in the right direction?
Right.
Is the way that we're implementing this process, is that kind of nudging us in allowing us to do things that we never could have done otherwise?
Right.
And that type of question, I think, starts to unlock it gets away from the small critiques and into the
bigger thinking.
That's right. We're getting onto the compass now. And that gets me pretty excited. Once we've decided, all right, this is a good tech, this is a good process, we're going to move forward. That's when we don't, where we found it to be more successful is we don't give them a choice as to whether or not they're going to implement it. But before we do that, we will likely have a policy on exactly how to implement, what's going to happen if you don't implement it. We've had situations where we're going to charge the job whether or not you use the tech or not.
Right.
And I mean, that's few and far between. We try not to do that, but we try to make it more, here's the problem. Pilot group said it was great. Here's the parameters around it. And then most importantly, it's not going to be perfect. And you've still got we have to be very patient with the process, but this is the direction we've got to go in. I don't know where it's all going to land, but I know it's headed this way, and this is going to help us take those steps.
Yeah. It's an interesting, I just hit my head. So I don't even hear about this very much anymore, but one of my earlier jobs in accounting was implementing EVA, economic value added, which that train of thought is very similar. You change the financial statement to take the impact of the costs you eliminate and so forth, but you still are charged so that you see over time there's a value to it, but you don't make a decision too flippantly, right? Because you're still going to have to incur the old cost of doing that. So if you eliminate people or whatever, that it actually gave you an ROI even higher than that.
You're right. And being able to calculate that ROI is so hard. I mean, it's like asking what's the return on taking a class. Like, it's just really tough to quantify, but you have to do it, and it won't be accurate, and that frustrates us, but it'll be materially correct. And that's what we're looking for.
So what went down the wrong path for you, and any tips you could give someone from what you learned going down the wrong path where they could keep that in mind as they're thinking about new technologies?
Oh man, a lot of, God, we've made so many mistakes, and I'm hoping we're just making the right one.
But you learn from them. So
we do.
And they go in the category of mistakes, but you get better each time, right?
That's right. That's right. Some things, I mean, the buy versus build thing, one of the biggest lessons that we've learned is, so for example, we built a contract reader, and it was really cool, and using artificial intelligence, and it still is very cool. And this was before a lot of those contract readers came onto the market and I wouldn't say they're perfect today, but a lot further ahead than they were, a few years back. And so we built that thing thinking we may own the world after this. There's a good chance we're going to all, retire at 45 years old. Anyway, so we, I think we made a mistake of getting very excited about techniques without really stopping and thinking, are we the people to do this? Do we really want to get in the software business? I mean, I want to be very fluent in software. I want to be I want to understand where I'm being hosed by some demo.
Absolutely.
But at the end of it, if there's somebody else out there doing it, we want to probably explore those options first.
Yes. Because that's all they focus on.
That's the only thing they're doing, right?
Yeah, and they're going to keep,
and their livelihood is dependent on being successful.
Yes. Yeah.
The other mistake I think we tend to make, and I know I do, is this stuff is just so exciting. And so if you hear just the word artificial intelligence, people just like, oh my gosh, this person's a futurist. And that's probably not true. I don't think it's here in the swell that we'll hear it, but oh, you think it's the future thing? It's here today. And there's some truth to that. I can ask Alexa to set a timer and play some music, and I can do some really neat stuff that is in my everyday life. But in terms of the accounting profession, there are some really progressive products out there, but I would not by any stretch say it's mainstream and it's really, we're all behind if we're not using AI.
Yeah.
Where I do think where we miss is we get so excited about the techniques, or we get so excited about the products that are being sold, that we don't realize that in the accounting world, people are really relying on us to just get it right. And so in audit and tax and a lot of our specialty consulting services, like, we can't really be wrong. And so for the most part, a lot of these tech companies are being run, and rightfully so, by data scientists and by startup entrepreneurs that know how tech companies should run, and they're incredible at it, and they're the most fascinating people to chat with. But they're not accountants. There are a handful of them that will have some accountants, or they will have maybe known some people, but it's data scientists typically trying to solve a problem that they've never experienced or never tried to actually do. At the same time, we have a bunch of accountants talking about technology, but really not knowing what they're talking about.
Right.
And, so it really takes both of them to be in partnership to make these things good. And so a lot of the products that we've tested, I try really hard to talk to them as much as I can, in terms of their roadmap and expressing I'm very honest with the software folks that we use to tell them exactly where I think it's falling short for purposes of full scale adoption. And what I've learned about tech companies, at least in front of me, they seem to love that feedback. And for exactly what you said a second ago, it's all they do, and they have to make it work. And maybe they're talking bad about us behind their back, or behind my back, but they really do appreciate that feedback. It gets on their roadmap, and it's incredible to see how fast they move. Being in an accounting firm, we're just not used to that. So it is fantastic. So I feel like that partnership is probably the most important thing. I don't look at the product and say that's what it's going to be next year. I look at the product and say, all right, is that the direction that we need to head in?
Yeah. And that's great advice. It reminded me, I was at an event a month or so ago at the AICPA, and there was a firm speaking about implementing technology. She gave a great tip that I'll share, but during the prospecting, trying to understand if this technology is going to work, she actually calls the customer support line with an issue and gets the real answer on whether that feature works or not. So I thought that was an awesome tip when you're going through the process of not just dealing with the sales side, like work in the product, call customer support. Why can't I get this to work? And they'll say, oh, that doesn't work. We're not working on that.
How smart is that? So she's a secret shopper.
It's such like a simple little tip, but great tip. Yeah.
I love that. Another thing I'll do, and most vendors are pretty open to it, is I'll get in touch with as many CPA firms as I can before we implement. And even during implementation, I found the other firms to be incredibly open with their processes and what they're going through. I've learned a ton from them and built a big network of other firms, and met some of the smartest, coolest people. And we're all trying to figure it out together. And so I thought, I love where we are today. I think that the profession is still at the education phase. I don't feel like firms are as behind. I think there are some behind firms, but I feel like a lot of them are doing the things that we can do, but we got so much work to do to really make this thing hit.
I agree. And I think it's an important point to end with, is just use the community, go to conferences, meet other CPAs, find people that are doing the things that you're doing online, follow people that are experts in this so that you meet other people that are following them. So it's just a great tip so that you have people to ask. I want to thank you so much for sharing with everybody today your experiences, and I think a lot of those tips are going to help a lot of accountants out there.
Thanks so much, Amy. It's great to see you again, and always fun to talk.